He swore the triplets weren't his. Years later he saw them and realized his terrible mistake. He swore the triplets weren't his, signed divorce papers, while she bled from nearly dying to give them life. Trevor Blake's voice was cold as hospital machines beeped his wife's fragile vitals. Mara left that room a single mother. 5 years later, he discovered the truth. It was all fabricated. The sons he abandoned? They had his eyes, his smile, his DNA, and absolutely no reason to trust him. Hi, my wonderful friends. Welcome to Mr. William Chronicles, where powerful stories reveal life's deepest truths. If you're new here, show some love and hit that subscribe button. Let me speak a blessing over you. May you find the strength to survive what should have broken you, the courage to protect those who depend on you, and the wisdom to recognize that some people deserve second chances, not because they've earned forgiveness, but because healing requires it. If you've ever been abandoned by someone who promised forever, or if you've had to raise children alone while the world judged you, hit that like button and comment below. This is the story of Mara Quincy, a woman who built an empire from a basement apartment while raising triplets on determination and midnight feedings. This is about Trevor Blake, a man who chose his father's lies over his wife's truth and spent years learning that some mistakes can't be undone, only lived with. And this is about Hayes, Griffin, and Owen, 3 boys who taught their parents that trust must be earned one day at a time, that biology doesn't make you a father, and that sometimes broken families can rebuild into something different, not perfect, but maybe enough. The sound of 3 newborns crying should have been the most beautiful symphony Trevor Blake had ever heard. Instead, standing in that sterile hospital corridor with divorce papers burning in his coat pocket, all he felt was the poisonous doubt his father had planted so deep it choked every good instinct trying to survive. Have you ever made a choice you'd give anything to take back? A single moment where fear overpowered love, and you destroyed everything that mattered? This is the story of a man who threw away his family based on lies, and the impossible journey to earn back fragments of what he shattered. But before we get to that devastating hospital room, you need to understand what they had, what Trevor destroyed. Trevor first kissed Mara Quincy at a charity gala, where champagne bubbles caught light like tiny stars, and string quartets played songs about forever. She wore emerald silk that clung to curves he couldn't stop tracking across the crowded ballroom. When he finally cornered her near the museum's marble pillars, away from judging eyes and careful society smiles, he tasted wine on her lips and felt her pulse race beneath his fingertips. "You've been staring at me all night," Mara whispered against his mouth, her breath warm and teasing. "Guilty," Trevor admitted, pressing her harder against cold marble, his hands spanning her waist. "I'm trying to figure out if you're real." She laughed, that deep, genuine sound that would later haunt his nightmares. "Very real, and very interested." Their courtship burned hot enough to leave scars. Stolen weekends in mountain cabins where they'd arrive Friday evening and barely leave the bedroom until Sunday sunset. Late nights where intellectual conversation about law and justice dissolved into desperate touching, his mouth learning every sound she made, her nails marking paths down his back. Mornings tangled in sheets that smelled like them, coffee and sex and something indefinable that felt like home. Mara was a civil rights attorney, sharp-minded and passionate about justice in ways that made Trevor's corporate law feel hollow. She'd argue cases over breakfast, pacing their kitchen in his shirt and nothing else, gesturing wildly about systemic inequality while he watched, mesmerized by her intensity. "You're staring again," she'd say, catching him. "Can't help it. You're magnificent when you're angry about injustice." They married on a beach at sunset, barefoot in sand still warm from the day's heat. Mara wore simple white linen, and when Trevor lifted the veil to kiss his bride, he tasted salt air and tears. Hers, his, both. Waves crashed behind them while they promised forever, and Trevor believed it with every cell in his body. But Trevor's father poisoned it slowly, methodically. Like arsenic in wine you don't taste until it's already destroying you from the inside. At family dinners in the Blake estate, his father would make comments with surgical precision. "Mara, dear, do your colleagues respect Trevor's softer approach to law?" Or, "Such an unusual pairing. I'm sure people talk, But you two don't mind, do you? Trevor defended her at first, told his father to back off, that Mara was brilliant and he was lucky to have her. But the seeds found fertile soil Trevor didn't know existed. Small doubts, tiny questions. Why did Mara work such long hours? Why did she sometimes seem distant? Why had she stopped sharing details about her cases? When Mara announced she was pregnant with triplets, Trevor's world exploded with joy. 3 babies. A ready-made family. Everything he'd ever wanted. His father's smile never reached his eyes. Triplets. How unexpected. They don't run in the Blake bloodline, you know. 2 weeks later, his father presented the photographs like evidence at trial. Glossy prints spread across Trevor's desk at the office where no one could interrupt. Mara outside a courthouse, speaking intensely with a tall black man in an expensive suit. Their body language intimate, too close, too animated. His hand on her shoulder. Another photo. Them at a coffee shop leaning across the table. Another. Walking together, heads bent in conversation. That's from 3 months ago, his father said quietly. My investigator documented 7 meetings over 5 weeks. Always during her trial preparation time. The pregnancy timing is suspicious, son. You need to protect yourself before those children trap you permanently. Trevor studied those photographs until they burned into his retinas. Mara had been stressed during the pregnancy, snapping at him when he asked about work. She'd stopped letting him touch her the way he used to, claiming exhaustion. And this man, whoever he was, appeared in photo after photo, week after week. Who is he? Trevor's voice came out strangled. Does it matter? His father's tone was gentle poison. What matters is protecting the Blake legacy. I've arranged for discreet legal counsel, just in case. The divorce papers appeared in Trevor's briefcase the next morning. Just in case became just in time when Mara went into early labor that night. The delivery was traumatic. Mara hemorrhaged on the table, her blood pressure crashing while doctors shouted medical terminology Trevor didn't understand. He stood outside the operating room, listening to machines scream warnings, watching nurses run with bags of blood, and he prayed to a God he wasn't sure he believed in. Save her, please. I'll do anything. 3 hours later, a doctor emerged looking exhausted. Your wife is stable. The triplets are premature, but alive. It was close, Mr. Blake. Very close. Trevor should have collapsed with relief. Should have rushed to Mara's side, with gratitude choking his throat. Should have held his newborn sons and counted their perfect fingers, and sworn to protect them forever. Instead, he activated the trap his father had set. Mara lay in the recovery room, pale as the sheets beneath her, dark circles under her eyes speaking to the trauma her body had endured. Machines beeped her fragile vitals, for lines snaked into her arms. She looked small and breakable in ways that should have shattered him. Trevor pulled out the photographs, placed them on her bed while she was still connected to tubes monitoring whether she'd survive. Tell me the truth about those babies, he said, his voice cold enough to frost the air between them. Tell me who their real father is. Mara's face transformed. Confusion flickered first, then disbelief, then something cold and final that made her unrecognizable. She pushed herself up despite the pain radiating through her body, and when she spoke, her voice could have cut diamonds. What did you just ask me? Trevor showed her the photographs, explained his father's concerns, demanded answers while she was still bleeding from bringing their sons into existence. Every word was a knife he didn't know he was turning. That's my law partner, Mara said, voice deadly calm. We were strategizing a civil rights case against your father's company. Discrimination lawsuit. But you've already decided I'm guilty, haven't you? The words hit like physical blows, but Trevor's father's voice was louder in his head. Protect yourself. Protect the legacy. Don't let them trap you. He pulled out the divorce papers his attorney had prepared. Sign these. You have 3 days to clear out of the house. Mara took the papers with hands that trembled only slightly. She didn't read them, didn't negotiate, didn't plead. She just signed her name over and over, each signature a nail in the coffin of everything they'd built together. When she finished, she looked at Trevor with eyes that would haunt every nightmare for the rest of his life. "When you realize your mistake," she said, "I want you to live with knowing you destroyed your family with your own cowardice. You looked at newborn babies and decided they weren't worth the risk of trusting me. That's who you are, Trevor. Remember that." Security escorted him out while nurses brought Mara her sons. Trevor walked to his father's car in the parking lot, divorce papers clutched in his fist, and tried to silence the voice screaming that he'd just committed an unforgivable sin. His father clapped his shoulder. "You did the right thing. Protected yourself. That's what Blake men do." But driving home to their empty mansion, Trevor couldn't stop seeing Mara's face. Couldn't stop hearing his newborn sons crying for a father who'd already abandoned them. And somewhere deep in his chest, where love used to live, a voice whispered, "You just destroyed the only thing that ever really mattered." Trevor just destroyed his family based on lies. Can a man redeem himself after this? If you're hooked, smash that like button. Comment below. Does he deserve a second chance? And subscribe, because what happens next will blow your mind. Mara Quincy became Mara Jennings the week after the divorce was finalized. New name, new state, new life built from the wreckage Trevor had left behind. The basement apartment smelled like mildew and old carpet, nothing like the mansion with its marble floors and panoramic views. But it was hers in a way that house had never been. One bedroom where 3 cribs pressed so close together she could reach all her sons without getting out of bed. A kitchen barely big enough to turn around in. Water stains on the ceiling that the landlord kept promising to fix. This was home now. The first night alone with 3 newborns, Mara sat on the floor between their cribs and cried until she had nothing left. Her body still ached from the delivery that nearly killed her. Her breasts were engorged and painful. Hayes was screaming, which set off Griffin, which made Owen start wailing in sympathy. The formula she'd bought with her last $20 sat unopened on the counter because she didn't know if she had the strength to stand up and make bottles. But she did, because her sons needed her, and there was no one else. Midnight feedings became her new normal. Wake at 12 for Hayes, sleep until 2, change Griffin at 3, sleep until 5. Start the day with Owen fussing for attention. Maybe 4 hours of sleep total, if everything went perfectly. It never went perfectly. Formula for triplets cost more than her rent. Diapers became a luxury she bought in bulk from discount stores, calculating the cost per unit like her life depended on it. Because it did. The settlement money from the divorce, what little Trevor's prenup had allowed, ran out faster than she calculated. Mara went back to work when the boys were 3 months old, taking a position at a small nonprofit because big law firms didn't accommodate single mothers with infant triplets. Her salary was a third of what she'd made before. Her student loans didn't care. But she learned to survive on nothing. Learned to make 1 package of chicken stretch across 4 meals. Learned to mend clothes instead of buying new ones. Learned to ask for help from the other mothers at the free community playgroup, swallowing her pride because her sons needed socialization she couldn't afford to pay for. Hayes was the first to sleep through the night, as if he understood his mother needed rest and decided to make it his responsibility to help. Griffin followed weeks later, his analytical nature apparently concluding that nighttime was for sleeping and he should comply with the pattern. Owen took longer, waking every few hours to make sure Mara was still there, his tiny hand reaching through the crib bars to touch her face when she appeared. She never complained about his need for reassurance. How could she, when she understood that somewhere deep in his infant consciousness, he sensed the abandonment that had marked his entry into the world. 300 miles away, Trevor built his empire on the foundation of his father's company. Mergers and acquisitions, hostile takeovers, profit margins that made shareholders applaud and competitors nervous. He worked 16-hour days because sleep brought dreams where Mara looked at him with those devastating eyes and asked why he'd chosen fear over love. He dated occasionally, beautiful women who wanted nothing serious, who didn't ask questions about the haunted look he couldn't quite hide. None of them lasted beyond a few months. None of them felt real the way Mara had. His father died 2 years after the divorce. Heart attack in his study, surrounded by the wealth he'd protected so carefully. Trevor stood at the funeral, accepting condolences from people who thought he was grieving. He wasn't. He was numb, until his father's lawyer called him into the office for the reading of the will. Standard stuff. Trevor inherited everything. But at the end, the lawyer handed him a sealed envelope. "Your father instructed me to give you this after his death." Trevor opened it alone in his car. His father's handwriting, shaky from whatever medication he'd been taking those final weeks. "Son, I need to confess something before I meet my maker. The investigator I hired to follow Mara, I instructed him to photograph her in ways that suggested intimacy where there was only professional collaboration. The colleague she was meeting with was her law partner on the discrimination case against our company. I knew that. I manufactured the evidence because I couldn't stomach the idea of Blake grandchildren being biracial. I destroyed your family because of my own bigotry. I'm sorry, though I know sorry doesn't fix what I broke." Trevor sat in that parking lot for 3 hours, the letter clutched in his fist, rage and grief and devastating clarity crushing his chest. His father had manufactured everything. The suspicious timing, the intimate photographs, the doubt that had felt so justified. Mara had been telling the truth about the law partner, about the case, about everything. And Trevor had believed lies because believing them was easier than confronting his own absorbed prejudices. Easier than admitting he'd doubted his wife because she was black and the colleague was black, and somewhere in his subconscious, his father's racism had taken root. He destroyed his family based on fabricated evidence and his own cowardice. Trevor hired investigators that night. The best money could buy. Find Mara Blake, now married, name unknown. Has triplet sons, approximately 2 years old. Last known location was here, but she's disappeared. They searched for months. Found nothing. Mara had learned how to become invisible, how to erase her existence from every database and directory. She'd changed her name, moved to a different state, built a life specifically designed to keep Trevor out. And he couldn't blame her. While Trevor searched, Mara raised their sons. Watched Hayes organize his toys with military precision, lining up cars and blocks in perfect rows. Watched Griffin sit by windows observing people pass by on the street, analyzing patterns only he could see. Watched Owen knock down whatever Hayes built, interrupt whatever Griffin was studying, demand attention with charm that made refusing him impossible. They were perfect, exhausting and expensive and perfect. At the park, other single mothers became Mara's lifeline. Women whose stories echoed pieces of her own, abandoned during pregnancy, divorced shortly after birth, widowed young. They traded babysitting hours, shared hand-me-down clothes, offered advice about tantrums and potty training, and the 1,000 small crises that came with raising children alone. One woman asked if Mara ever thought about the boy's father. Mara's answer was immediate and final. He made his decision when they were hours old. Whatever he feels now doesn't matter, because he'll never get the chance to hurt them the way he hurt me. She meant it with every fiber of her being. Trevor had surrendered his right to fatherhood in that hospital room. And Mara would spend the rest of her life making sure her sons never felt the absence of someone who'd chosen not to be present. She would be enough. She would be everything. By the time Hayes, Griffin, and Owen turned 5, Mara had clawed her way to founding her own nonprofit, support systems for single mothers navigating the legal system. The work was personal. Every woman she helped was a version of herself from 5 years ago, terrified and alone and convinced she couldn't survive. But they did survive, just like she had. And if Trevor Blake thought he could waltz back into their lives after 5 years of absence, he had another thing coming. If you've made it this far in the story, show some love and hit that subscribe button. This journey is just getting started. Drop a like if you're Team Mara, because this woman is a fighter. And comment below, could you survive what she's been through? Let me know, because we are getting to where Trevor's world collides with the family he abandoned. Trevor's assistant placed the legal journal on his desk during a routine morning meeting, about quarterly projections. He almost ignored it. Another industry publication filled with articles he'd skim and forget. But something made him flip it open during lunch. Alone in his office, with takeout he wouldn't eat. Page 17 stopped his heart. Keynote speaker profile. Mara Jennings, founder of Foundations Legal Aid. The photograph showed a woman he barely recognized. Mara, because it was unmistakably her despite the different surname, looked powerful in ways she'd never had the chance to be during their marriage. Confident smile. Tailored suit that spoke of success she'd earned entirely on her own. Eyes that had seen hell and decided to build something beautiful from the ashes. But it was the smaller photograph at the bottom of the profile that made Trevor's hands shake so violently he dropped the journal. 3 identical boys, maybe 5 years old, grinning at the camera with matching dimples and mischievous eyes. The caption read, "Jennings credits her 3 sons, Hayes, Griffin, and Owen, as her inspiration for founding the organization." Trevor picked up the journal with trembling fingers, bringing the photograph closer. The boys had his eyes, his chin, his smile. The resemblance was so obvious it felt like looking at childhood photographs of himself in triplicate. Those were his sons, the babies he'd refused to hold in that hospital room, the children he'd abandoned based on lies. And they were beautiful, thriving, growing up without him in a life Mara had built from nothing while he'd been living in the mansion they used to share, slowly drowning in regret. The article mentioned she'd be keynoting a conference on single mothers navigating the justice system. National Legal Aid Convention. Chicago. 3 weeks away. Trevor cleared his calendar without hesitation. The conference center was packed when Trevor arrived. Standing room only in the main hall. He positioned himself in the back corner where he could see without being immediately visible, his heart hammering against his ribs like it was trying to escape his chest. When Mara walked onto that stage, Trevor forgot how to breathe. She moved with authority he'd never seen in her before, owning the space in a way that commanded attention without demanding it. When she spoke, her voice carried across the room with the same passion she'd had arguing cases over breakfast in their kitchen, but refined now, focused, devastating in its conviction. "Single mothers are told they're broken," Mara said, her words hitting like physical blows. "That their families are incomplete, that their children will suffer from absent fathers. But I'm here to tell you that's a lie designed to make you feel less than. My sons don't have an absent father. They have a present mother who is enough, who has always been enough, who will always be enough." The audience erupted in applause. Trevor felt each word like a knife between his ribs because she was talking about him, about what he'd done, about the hole he'd left that she'd filled so completely his sons apparently didn't even notice his absence. Then Mara displayed a photograph on the screen behind her. Hayes, Griffin, and Owen at what looked like a soccer game, covered in grass stains and holding participation trophies. Their smiles were genuine and unguarded. "Happy. My inspiration," Mara said simply. "The 3 reasons I fight every single day." Trevor gripped the edge of the table in front of him, his vision tunneling. Those boys had his nose, his expressions, features he'd passed down through DNA but had done nothing to earn through presence. They existed in the world as walking proof of his greatest failure, and they were perfect. After the presentation ended, Trevor moved through the crowd with single-minded determination. He needed to reach Mara before she left the stage, needed to tell her that he knew the truth now, that his father had confessed, that he'd spent 3 years searching for her. But Mara saw him coming. Their eyes met across the crowded room, and the look she gave him was colder than anything Trevor had ever experienced. Recognition flashed first, then something dangerous and protective. She turned deliberately, walking toward the exit with her assistant running interference, creating a human barrier between them. "Mara," Trevor called her name, desperation making his voice crack. "Please." She stopped, didn't turn around, but stopped moving. Her assistant looked uncertain, glancing between them, clearly sensing the volatile history crackling in the air. When Mara finally turned to face him, her expression could have frozen oceans. "You don't get to speak to me, Trevor." You lost that right when you handed me divorce papers for my hospital bed." The words hit like physical blows, but Trevor pushed forward. "I know. I know I destroyed everything, but I need you to understand what happened. My father lied about everything. The investigator, the photographs. All of it was manufactured to convince me you'd been unfaithful. He admitted it before he died. He destroyed our family because he was a bigot who couldn't accept that our children would be biracial." Something flickered in Mara's expression. Maybe vindication that she'd been right about his father all along. Maybe satisfaction that the truth had finally surfaced. But it disappeared quickly behind that same cold control. "And you believed him," she said, voice deadly calm. "That's what matters, Trevor. You chose to believe the worst of me instead of trusting the woman you'd married. The woman who'd never given you a single reason to doubt her. You looked at newborn babies and decided they weren't worth loving because your father planted suspicion in your mind. That's who you are. That's what you did. And whatever excuses you've created to live with yourself don't change the facts." "Those boys in the photograph," Trevor said desperately, his voice breaking. "Hayes, Griffin, and Owen. They're mine, aren't they? They're my sons." Mara's laugh was bitter and sharp, a sound that had nothing to do with humor. "They're mine. Only mine. You made sure of that when you walked out of that hospital room. Biology doesn't make you a father, Trevor. Presence does. Love does. Sacrifice does. Midnight feedings and diaper changes, and being there when they're sick and scared. And you've done none of those things for Hayes, Griffin, and Owen. You're nothing to them. Just a stranger asking questions he has no right to ask." She turned to walk away, and Trevor's voice came out broken, stripped of every defense. "Please. I'm begging you. Let me meet them. Let me try to fix what I destroyed. I'll do anything, Mara. Anything you ask. Just give me a chance to be their father." Mara stopped, her back still turned to him. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of 5 years of pain. "You want to be their father? Then prove you've changed. Prove you're not the same man who could abandon his family based on lies. Prove you're capable of putting someone else's needs before your own fear." She turned slightly, meeting his eyes over her shoulder. "And maybe if you can actually demonstrate that you're worthy of knowing them, I'll consider letting you into their lives. But don't expect forgiveness, Trevor. Don't expect me to ever trust you again. The best you can hope for is that I'll eventually believe you won't destroy them the way you destroyed me." She walked away, her heels clicking against the polished floor with finality. Her assistant followed, glancing back once at Trevor with something like pity in her expression. Trevor stood in the empty corridor, surrounded by conference attendees who pretended not to stare, feeling the weight of his failures crushing down on him with physics-defying force. He'd found his sons, confirmed they existed, confirmed they were his, confirmed that Mara had spent 5 years raising them alone while he'd been chasing ghosts and living with regret that tasted like poison. And now the hardest part began, proving to a woman he'd betrayed in the cruelest possible way that he'd somehow become worthy of the second chance he didn't deserve. Mara's letter arrived 3 days after the conference. Trevor held the envelope for 20 minutes before opening it, knowing whatever was inside would either give him hope or destroy what little remained. For conditions, typed in clinical language that stripped away any possibility of negotiation. First, 1 full year of intensive therapy. Not casual sessions about stress management, but genuine psychological work confronting the beliefs and fears that made you capable of abandoning newborn children. You will provide monthly documentation to a therapist I select, Dr. Patricia Morrison, who will evaluate whether you're actually changing or just learning to say the right words. Second, 6 months working full-time at Riverside Family Shelter. Not volunteer hours when convenient, but actual daily work with families in crisis. The director will report to me about your performance, attitude, and genuine engagement. Third, establish trust funds of no less than $2 million each for Hayes, Griffin, and Owen. Funds you cannot access, control, or use as leverage. Trustees will be people I appoint. These funds exist regardless of whether you ever meet my sons. Fourth, Write detailed letters to each boy explaining exactly what you did and why. Complete accountability without softening or excuses. These letters will be sealed, held by my attorney, and given to them when they turn 18, so they can make their own decisions about whether to pursue a relationship with their biological father as adults. Completing these conditions does not guarantee you will meet Hayes, Griffin, and Owen. They are prerequisites for me to even consider whether that meeting could happen without causing damage. You destroyed them once by refusing to be their father. I won't let you destroy them again by being an inadequate version of one. Prove you've changed. Not for me, but for them. And if you can't, then have the decency to stay gone. Trevor read the letter 7 times. Each condition was designed to humiliate him, to test whether his remorse was performance or genuine transformation. Mara had structured requirements that might not result in him ever meeting his sons, even if he completed everything perfectly. Most men would have refused, would have hired lawyers and demanded paternity tests, and forced their way into their children's lives using the system that favored fathers who showed up late demanding rights they'd never earned. Trevor picked up his phone and called his attorney. "Don't file anything. I'm not taking her to court." His lawyer sputtered objections about parental rights and legal standing. Trevor hung up mid-sentence. He'd spent his life forcing outcomes through leverage and power. Look where it had gotten him. Alone in a mansion filled with everything except the things that mattered. He sent Mara a response. One word: agreed. Dr. Patricia Morrison didn't accept excuses, didn't let Trevor hide behind his father's manipulation or his own fear. Their first session lasted 90 minutes and left Trevor feeling like he'd been psychologically eviscerated. "Your father planted the seeds," Dr. Morrison said, her voice clinical and unforgiving. "But you watered them. You're the one who looked at newborn babies and decided they weren't worth the risk of being wrong. You're the one who prioritized your own fear over your wife's truth. Own that. Stop hiding behind your father's bigotry and face what you did." The sessions became torture. Trevor had spent years constructing narratives that made his choices understandable, that painted him as a victim of manipulation rather than an active participant in destruction. Dr. Morrison demolished those narratives one by one, forcing him to sit with the reality that he'd been capable of extraordinary cruelty toward the people who'd needed him most. "Let's talk about race," Dr. Morrison said during their 4th session. "Your wife is black. The colleague in the photographs was black. Why did you immediately assume infidelity instead of considering 1,000 other explanations?" Trevor wanted to argue that it wasn't about race, but the evidence was there in his own actions. He believed his father's lies so easily because they confirmed biases he hadn't known he carried. Somewhere in his subconscious, he'd absorbed the idea that interracial relationships were inherently suspicious, that black women were untrustworthy, that his biracial sons would be somehow less than. "I'm a racist," Trevor said, the words tasting like ash. "I married a black woman thinking that proved I wasn't prejudiced, but when doubt arose, my immediate assumption was betrayal. I didn't consider medical explanations or family genetics. I jumped straight to infidelity because I've been primed to believe it." Dr. Morrison nodded. "That's the first honest thing you've said in our sessions. Now the question is whether you're willing to do the work to change." Riverside Family Shelter smelled like industrial cleaning solution and desperation. Trevor reported for his first day, expecting to process paperwork and feel good about himself. Instead, the director, a woman named Ruth who'd been doing this work for 20 years, put him on intake duty. "You'll meet every family that comes through those doors," Ruth said. "You'll hear their stories. You'll witness what abandonment actually looks like. And maybe you'll understand what you did." The first woman Trevor processed was 23, with twin daughters clinging to her legs. She'd been abandoned during pregnancy, left homeless when her boyfriend decided fatherhood was too much responsibility. "Any man who can look at a baby and walk away isn't human," she said while filling out forms, not knowing she was talking to exactly that kind of man. Trevor helped her with paperwork, his hands shaking, seeing his sons and those twin girls, seeing the damage he'd caused written in this young mother's exhausted face. A teenage girl came in later that week with her mother and infant brother, 16 years old, with eyes that had seen too much. "I don't trust men," she told Trevor bluntly. "My father abandoned us when my brother was born, claimed the baby couldn't be his, left us with nothing." Trevor processed her intake forms with hands that trembled, carrying guilt her father should have felt but apparently didn't. Woman after woman whose stories echoed Mara's. Children growing up wondering why their fathers hadn't stayed. Families fractured by choices that couldn't be undone. Ruth pulled Trevor aside after his first month. "You're different from most volunteers. You're not here to feel good about yourself. You're here like you're doing penance." Trevor told her the truth. All of it. About abandoning his triplets, about his father's lies, about Mara's conditions, about trying to become worthy of sons who didn't know he existed. Ruth listened without judgment, then said something that haunted him. "Penance is about punishment. What you need is transformation. Don't come here to suffer. Come here to learn what real strength looks like in these women who keep fighting for their children despite everything. Learn what real love looks like in these single mothers who put their kids first always. Learn what you should have been so you can become it now, even if it's too late." The trust funds were established through attorneys. $5 million each, more than Mara had demanded, held by trustees she appointed. Structured so Hayes, Griffin, and Owen would be financially secure regardless of whether Trevor ever met them. Money couldn't compensate for years of absence, but it was something. A tangible commitment that existed whether or not he earned the right to be their father. Writing the letters to his sons nearly destroyed him. Dr. Morrison rejected his first 7 drafts for trying to soften the blow or excuse his behavior. "Tell them the truth," she demanded. "That you looked at them hours after birth and decided they weren't worth the risk of loving. That you chose fear and prejudice over fatherhood. That their mother is a hero and you are nothing." The final versions were brutal in their honesty. Trevor sealed them knowing they'd be saved for years, opened when his sons were 18. Used as evidence of his failure or transformation depending on what kind of man he'd managed to become. A year into the process, Dr. Morrison delivered her evaluation to Mara. Trevor never saw the full report, but she told him the conclusion. "You've done real work. You've confronted the ugliest parts of yourself and made genuine changes. But understanding your failure doesn't erase it. Those boys might never forgive you, and you have to accept that as the consequence of your choice." Trevor accepted it because he had no other option. He'd completed Mara's conditions not because he thought they'd guarantee access to his sons, but because doing the work had become more important than the outcome. He'd become someone different through the process. Someone who understood that fatherhood wasn't about rights or DNA, but about showing up consistently, putting children's needs first always, being present in ways that built security rather than fear. Now he waited for Mara's decision, knowing she might still say no. Might decide that completing her conditions didn't make him safe enough to let near their sons. And if she made that choice, Trevor would have to live with it, because respecting her judgment was part of proving he'd changed. You're halfway through this story, and if you're still watching, you're invested, and I appreciate that. Show that investment. Slam that subscribe button, because we are getting to where Trevor finally meets his sons. And it's not what you expect. Hit like if you think he's earned this chance. And drop a comment. Has Trevor done enough? Or is redemption impossible for what he did? Your answer might surprise you after the next chapter. Hayes found the documents by accident. He'd been searching through his mother's desk for colored pencils to finish a school project and pulled out a folder with his name written across the front in Mara's handwriting. Inside were papers with complicated legal words he couldn't fully read yet. But he recognized his birthday, saw Griffin and Owen's names, and at the top of one page, in bold letters, Trevor Blake, father. Hayes carried the folder to the kitchen where Mara was preparing dinner, Griffin and Owen playing in the living room. "Mom, who's Trevor Blake?" Mara froze, the knife in her hand clattering against the cutting board. She'd known this moment was coming eventually, had practiced speeches in her head about how to explain their father without making them feel abandoned. But she hadn't expected it now. hadn't expected Hayes to discover the truth through legal documents rather than careful conversation. She turned off the stove and called Griffin and Owen into the kitchen. All three boys stood in front of her looking confused and slightly worried because their mother's face had gone pale. Mara sat down on the floor so she was at their eye level and spoke words she'd been dreading for years. Trevor Blake is your father. He made a terrible mistake when you were born, and he hasn't been part of your lives because of choices he made that had nothing to do with who you are. Hayes's face transformed from confusion to something harder, more protective. He didn't want us. Mara chose her words carefully. He was confused and scared and believed lies that someone told him. He wasn't ready to be a father. Sometimes adults make catastrophic mistakes that hurt the people they should protect most. What happened wasn't about you being not good enough. It was about him failing to be what you deserved. Griffin, always analytical, asked the question Mara had hoped he wouldn't. Is he the man who's been watching us at the park? Mara's blood ran cold. What man? We've seen him a few times, Griffin said matter-of-factly. He stands behind the trees and watches us play. He looks sad. The revelation that Trevor had been surveilling their sons without her knowledge made Mara furious and terrified in equal measure. How long has he been there? Griffin shrugged. I don't know. A while. Owen, who'd been quiet until now, asked the question that shattered Mara's carefully constructed explanations. If he knows about us now, why doesn't he want to meet us? Are we bad? Mara pulled Owen into her lap, holding him tight. No, sweetheart. You're perfect. All three of you are perfect. He wants to meet you. He's asked me several times. But I've been trying to make sure he won't hurt you the way he hurt me. I've been making him prove he's changed before I let him anywhere near you. Hayes's expression was fierce. He hurt you. Mara debated how much to tell them, how much truth 5-year-olds could handle. She decided they deserved honesty without graphic details. When you were born, I was very sick. The delivery was difficult and I almost died. While I was still in the hospital, your father told me he didn't think you were his children. He asked for a divorce and told me to leave his house. I had to raise you alone from the very beginning with no help from him. That's why we live in this apartment instead of a big house. Why I work so hard. Why it's just been the 4 of us. I've been protecting you from someone who hurt us when we were most vulnerable. The 3 boys processed this information with different reactions. Hayes's hands clenched into fists, his protective instincts focused on his mother. Griffin looked thoughtful, turning the information over in his mind, trying to understand the logic of abandonment. Owen started crying quietly, fat tears rolling down his cheeks. Why would he think we weren't his? Griffin asked. Mara took a breath. His father, your grandfather, told him lies about me. He didn't want him to be married to me because I'm black, and he thought I wasn't good enough for their family. He hired people to make it look like I'd been unfaithful, and your father believed him instead of trusting me. That's why he left. So he left because of your skin color? Hayes asked, his voice sharp. Partly, Mara admitted. It's more complicated than that. But yes, his father's racism was part of why he convinced him to doubt me. And your father let himself be convinced because somewhere inside, he had his own doubts he hadn't confronted. Hayes stood up, his small body radiating fury. I don't want to meet him. He's mean, and he hurt you, and I don't care if he wants to know us now. It's too late. Griffin nodded in agreement. If he didn't want us then, why should we want him now? Owen, still crying, asked the question that broke Mara's heart. Does he want to meet us because he loves us or because he feels bad? Mara didn't have a good answer. I think both, honey. I think he realized he made a horrible mistake and he's been trying to become a better person. But I don't know if he's trying for the right reasons. What are the right reasons? Griffin asked. He should want to know you because you're wonderful, not because he feels guilty about abandoning you. He should want to be your father, because being your father is the greatest privilege anyone could have, not because he wants to feel less terrible about his choices. Hayes crossed his arms. I don't want to meet him. I don't need a father. I have you and Griffin and Owen. That's enough. Mara felt tears burn her eyes because Hayes was trying to protect her, trying to be the man of the family at 5 years old, carrying responsibilities that should never have been his. You don't have to meet him if you don't want to. This is your choice. All three of you get to decide whether you want him in your life. Has he been trying to be better? Owen asked quietly. Mara nodded. He's been going to therapy for a year, learning why he was capable of walking away from you. He's been working with families like ours, helping other children whose fathers abandoned them. He's put money aside for your futures that he can't touch or control. And he's written letters to each of you, explaining what he did and why. Letters you'll get to read when you're older. The three boys were quiet, absorbing this information. Finally, Hayes walked over and put his small hand on Mara's shoulder. We'll meet him, but only if you're there the whole time. And if he's mean to you or us, we never have to see him again. That's the rule. Mara agreed, her voice breaking. I'll be there for every second, and you can walk away whenever you want. Meeting him doesn't mean forgiving him. It doesn't mean calling him Dad. It just means giving him a chance to prove he's changed from the man who hurt us. The park was neutral territory, public, familiar, easy to leave if things went wrong. Mara arranged a meeting for a Wednesday afternoon, not telling Trevor which park until that morning, maintaining control of every detail. Trevor sat on a bench waiting, and when he saw them approaching, he stood immediately. Mara had shown the boys a recent photograph, and watching her sons see their father for the first time made her chest tighten with fear and grief. Hayes whispered to his brothers, "Stay behind me," his protective instincts kicking in immediately. Mara stopped several feet away, her sons clustered behind her like she was a shield. "Boys, this is Trevor Blake. Trevor, these are your sons, Hayes, Griffin, and Owen." Trevor's eyes filled with tears the moment he looked at them up close. Really looked at them for the first time since they were newborns. "Hello," he said, his voice breaking. "Thank you for agreeing to meet me." None of the boys responded. They just stared at him with identical expressions of caution and judgment. Finally, Griffin spoke. "You're the man who's been watching us at the park." Trevor looked stricken. "I'm sorry. I know that was wrong. I just needed to see you. Needed to know you were real and okay. But I shouldn't have watched without permission." "Why didn't you want us when we were born?" Owen asked bluntly. The question hung in the air between them. Trevor knelt down so he was at their eye level, and when he spoke, his voice was steady despite the tears on his face. "I was scared and weak, and I believed lies someone told me about your mother. I thought you might not be my children, and instead of waiting to find out the truth, I walked away. I made the worst decision anyone can make. I abandoned you when you needed me most. And nothing I do for the rest of my life will change that." "Our mom almost died because of you," Hayes said fiercely. "She had to take care of us all alone, and you didn't help." "I know. Your mother is the strongest person I've ever known. She did everything I should have been doing. She's the hero of your story, and I'm the person who failed you." Griffin studied Trevor with that analytical gaze. "Are you saying sorry because you feel guilty or because you actually love us?" The question was devastating in its perception. Trevor took a breath before answering. "I feel guilty. I should feel guilty. But I also love you. Even though I know that doesn't make sense because I don't know you. I love you because you exist. Because you're my sons. Because watching you from a distance has shown me that you're extraordinary. But you don't have to care about my love. You don't owe me anything." The conversation continued. Hard questions, honest answers. No softening of the brutal truth. And through it all, Mara watched Trevor take full accountability in ways that were clearly destroying him. When the meeting ended, the boys were quiet on the drive home. Finally, Owen spoke. "I don't hate him, but I don't love him either." "You don't have to love him," Mara assured him. "You don't have to feel anything except whatever comes naturally." "Can we see him again?" Owen asked. The question surprised Mara. "Do you want to?" Owen shrugged. "Maybe. He seems really sorry." Hayes shook his head. "Sorry doesn't fix anything." "No," Mara agreed. "But sometimes it's a starting point." The call came on a random Tuesday afternoon 3 weeks after the park meeting. Hayes's name appeared on Trevor's phone. Unusual, because the boys never called him directly. Trevor answered immediately, his heart already racing with worry. Trevor. Hayes's voice was trying to sound brave, but failing. Mom collapsed at work. They brought her to the hospital, and nobody will tell us what's wrong. We're scared. Trevor was already grabbing his keys, heading toward the door. Which hospital? I'm coming right now. He drove faster than he should have, his mind racing through possibilities. Mara had been working herself to exhaustion for years, raising Triplets alone, building a non-profit from nothing, carrying the weight of their family on shoulders that should have had help. Had her body finally given out? He found the boys in the pediatric waiting area, all three sitting close together on a too small couch. Griffin holding Owen, who was crying quietly. Hayes standing guard like he could protect his brothers from whatever was happening to their mother. When they saw Trevor, relief flooded their faces in a way that made his chest tight. Have they told you anything? Trevor asked, sitting down next to them. Just that she fainted and they're running tests, Griffin said, his analytical voice wavering. They won't let us see her yet. Trevor made calls, leveraged connections, and within 10 minutes had information. Mara was severely anemic, exhausted to the point of collapse, but would be fine with rest and treatment. She'd been pushing herself too hard for too long, and her body had simply shut down in protest. Your mom is going to be okay, Trevor told the boys, watching tension drain from their small shoulders. She needs rest and medical treatment, but she's not in danger. Owen launched himself at Trevor, wrapping small arms around his neck and crying into his shoulder. Hayes looked like he wanted to maintain distance, but couldn't quite manage it, his tough exterior cracking. Griffin just watched, processing, but Trevor saw relief in his analytical eyes. When they were finally allowed into Mara's room, she looked exhausted but stable. Her eyes widened when she saw Trevor. What are you doing here? Hayes called me, Trevor said simply. I came. Mara looked at her sons, something complicated passing across her face. You called him. We were scared, Owen admitted. And he answered. Her boys climbed carefully onto the bed, surrounding her, holding on like they'd been terrified of losing her. Trevor stood back, giving them space, watching this family he'd created and abandoned rebuild itself around his absence. You should rest, Trevor told Mara. I'll stay with them. We'll be right here when you wake up. Mara looked like she wanted to argue, wanted to refuse his help out of principle. But exhaustion won. Don't let them eat too much candy from the vending machine. I won't, Trevor promised. He stayed all night, handled logistics, canceling Mara's meetings, reaching out to her support network, arranging for clothes and supplies. Hours passed while nurses came and went, and the boys dozed off one by one, exhausted from fear. Around midnight, Griffin woke up disoriented and saw Trevor still sitting there. You stayed. Of course I stayed. I told you I would. Griffin studied him for a long moment. Most people don't mean it when they say stuff like that. I know, Trevor said quietly. I'm trying to be different than most people. Weeks passed. Trevor showed up for school pickups when Mara needed help. Attended soccer games where he cheered from the sidelines. Helped with homework, learning that Hayes struggled with math, Griffin loved science, and Owen couldn't sit still during reading time. He memorized their routines, their friends' names, their favorite foods. He became a fixture in their lives, not the center, but present enough to matter. One night, dropping them off after dinner, Owen hugged him goodbye, just casually, like it was normal, like Trevor had been getting hugs from him for years instead of carefully maintained distance. Trevor froze, then carefully hugged back. When Owen pulled away, he smiled and ran inside without fanfare. Hayes noticed. He's decided you're safe. Griffin and I are still evaluating. That's fair, Trevor said. But you're doing okay so far, Hayes admitted grudgingly. Don't mess it up. Trevor drove home that night feeling something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. Not certainty that everything would work out. Not confidence that his sons would ever call him dad. Just fragile hope that maybe, possibly, eventually, they might actually want him in their lives for reasons beyond obligation. He'd never be their father in the way he should have been from the beginning. Too much time had been lost. Too much damage done. But maybe he could become something else, a person they chose to have around, because his presence added value to their lives. It wasn't redemption. It wasn't forgiveness. Some mistakes were too big to erase, too deep to heal completely. But sitting in his car outside his empty house, Trevor realized it was enough. Being part of his sons' lives on whatever terms they offered was more than he deserved. More than he'd hoped for when Mara had first set her impossible conditions. He'd spent years trying to earn his way back. And now, finally, he had a foothold. Not a guarantee, not a promise, just a chance to keep showing up, keep proving himself, keep being present until his sons believed he was staying for real. Mara watched from her apartment window as Trevor's car pulled away. She'd seen the hug, seen Hayes' grudging admission, seen her sons starting to trust the man who'd abandoned them. It terrified her, but it also gave her something she hadn't expected. Hope that maybe her boys could have a father after all. Not the one they deserved from the beginning, but the one he was fighting to become. She picked up her phone and sent Trevor a text. Same time next week. Don't be late. His response came immediately. I'll be there. And somehow, despite everything, Mara believed him. The story hadn't reached its ending. Trevor might spend the rest of his life earning fragments of fatherhood, proving himself one day at a time, building trust that should have been automatic. The boys might never call him dad. Mara might never forgive him completely. But that fragile beginning promised nothing except the chance to keep trying. And for a man who destroyed everything, that chance was a gift he'd spend the rest of his life honoring. Some mistakes can't be erased. Some wounds don't fully heal. But sometimes, just sometimes, broken things can be rebuilt into something different. Not perfect, not whole, but maybe, just maybe, enough. You've reached the end of Trevor's journey. But is it really the end, or just the beginning? If this story moved you, hit that like button right now. Subscribe to Mr. William Chronicles for more powerful stories about life, redemption, and second chances. And drop a comment telling me, do you believe Trevor earned his second chance, or will he always be the man who abandoned his sons at birth? Your perspective matters. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.